At 82, one accumulates a wealth of life experience. Yet there's one decision he now deeply regrets: moving into a nursing home. At the time, it seemed like a sensible choice, fully supported by his family, who promised comprehensive care and comfortable living conditions. He trusted their words. However, once there, he realized the reality was vastly different from his initial expectations. Many people likely consider this option, either for themselves or their loved ones. They might believe it's the safest choice or have been led to think it will simplify daily life. But before taking such a step, he wants to share 6 crucial aspects he wished he had known before moving. The truth is, life in a nursing home isn't just about convenience. It fundamentally transforms every aspect of one's existence. And once inside those walls, leaving isn't as easy as it might seem. Regret 1. Loss of independence. The most striking discovery after moving into the nursing home wasn't the confined room, the strict meal times, or even the abundance of unfamiliar faces. It was the sudden, profound realization that he had lost control over his own life. Before this fateful step, he had his established routines. He decided when to wake up, when to eat, and how to spend his day. He could go for a walk whenever he pleased, cook a meal to his taste, or simply relax in his favorite armchair with a book. Within the nursing home walls, however, he soon realized his time was no longer his own. His entire life was dictated by a rigid schedule alien to his rhythm. Breakfast was served at a fixed time, even if he wasn't hungry. Bedtime arrived at a set hour, regardless of his readiness. Want to go for a walk? It might require special permission, and he'd likely have to wait for staff assistance. Basic decisions, like what to eat or even what to wear, became privileges, not fundamental rights. He recalls his first week there, waking in a bed that didn't feel his own. He sat up, stretched, and reached for the book he'd been reading at home. But as he looked around the room, a sudden realization hit him. This wasn't his home, not his books, not his favorite armchair. The small, yet significant, comforts he'd accumulated over years had vanished. Instead, there were impersonal, sterile walls, a bed he hadn't chosen, and a persistent feeling he couldn't shake. He was no longer the master of his life. The most distressing part is realizing that once one surrenders autonomy, regaining it is nearly impossible. He adapts because there's no other choice. He stops arguing when told what's for dinner. He stops asking if he can go for a walk whenever he wants. He learns to fit into their system, but in the process, he gradually loses his individuality. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready to give up the small but vital freedoms that make your life truly your own? Because once they are gone, you will yearn for them more than you ever imagined. Regret 2. The feeling of being forgotten. One of the most poignant truths about moving into a nursing home is realizing that the outside world continues its relentless movement, disregarding your absence. When he first arrived, his family assured him they would visit regularly. He trusted their words, and at first they did. His daughter came once a week, grandchildren visited on weekends, and for a while, it seemed he still had an unbroken connection to his old life. However, as months passed, visits became rarer. His daughter gradually preferred calling over in-person visits. The grandchildren, immersed in studies and work, found their time even more scarce. Holidays were the most agonizing. Everyone promised to come, but somehow plans invariably changed at the last minute. Suddenly, he found himself sitting alone in the common room. He watched other residents gaze hopefully at the doorway, cherishing the hope that someone would remember them today. The point isn't that his family stopped loving him. It's simply that life's circumstances got in the way, consuming their time and attention. When you're no longer part of others' daily lives, it's easy for them to assume you're fine, adapting well, and don't need such close attention. Yet, the truth is the longer you stay in a nursing home, the easier it is for others to forget how much you still need their presence and care. He recalls one evening sitting in his room, holding the phone, wondering whether to call his son. He didn't want to be a burden. He didn't want to remind him of his existence, that he was there, waiting for a visit that might never happen. So he put the phone down. In that moment, it hit him. This was his life now, watching days pass, hoping someone would remember to include him in their plans. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready for the loneliness? Because no matter how much your family loves you, once you're out of sight, you're forgotten much more easily than you can imagine. Regret 3. Loss of purpose. When he moved into the nursing home, he believed he was simply changing residences. He didn't realize he was simultaneously changing the meaning of his existence. At home, he had responsibilities, established routines, beloved hobbies, and a compelling reason to get up in the mornings. Even the smallest actions, watering plants, making his own coffee, keeping his space tidy, gave him a sense of purpose. In the nursing home, however, these daily rituals vanished. Meals were prepared for him, cleaning was done by someone else, and the plants, well, they weren't his to tend anymore. At first, he convinced himself it would be nice to finally relax. No more chores, no responsibilities, just rest. But after a few weeks, he realized something was missing. The days felt endlessly long, dragging on, with nothing to do but wait. He observed this in other residents too. People who were once vibrant now spent their days sitting, staring into space, waiting for time to pass. There was a man named George, 84, who had been a carpenter his whole life. At home, he was always fixing things, creating small projects in his garage. But here, there were no tools, no projects, nothing for him to create. He watched George slowly fade, his hands, once strong and skilled, now idle in his lap. "I feel useless," George told him one day, and he knew exactly what he meant. When you no longer have something to care for, something to strive for, life begins to lose its meaning. The mind slows, the body follows, and soon you feel like just another resident in a place where time moves, but nothing truly changes. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself what gives your life meaning. Because once you move, finding purpose isn't as simple as just filling your time. It's about fighting to keep what makes you feel alive. Regret 4. Health deterioration faster than expected. Before moving into the nursing home, he felt quite well for his age. He wasn't running marathons, but he could still care for himself, take walks, and cook his own meals. He had his small habits that kept him moving: grocery shopping, morning stretches, even just walking around the house to keep his legs strong. But once he moved, everything changed. At first, it felt like he was just resting. Meals were brought to him, and he no longer had to stand in the kitchen to cook. If he needed anything, he could just press a button, and someone would come to help. However, he didn't realize that the less he did for himself, the weaker he became. He moved less, and soon his legs grew stiffer. He sat more than before, and before he knew it, getting out of a chair felt like a chore. Muscles he had maintained for years vanished faster than he ever expected. And it wasn't just him. He saw it happen to others too. People who arrived walking suddenly depended on wheelchairs. Those who were once independent now needed help with things they'd never struggled with before. The more assistance they received, the more they seemed to need it. He recalls his neighbor, Alice, an 81-year-old woman who was very spry when she first arrived. She took daily walks around the facility, insisting she wouldn't slow down just because of age. But after a few months, he noticed she walked less. Then she started using a walker, then a wheelchair. One day, she looked at him and said, "I don't know when it happened, but I feel like I've aged 10 years in just a few months." That's exactly how it felt. When you stop using your body, you start to lose it. And in a nursing home, where everything is designed for ease, it's easy to forget that movement isn't just a convenience, it's survival. If he had foreseen how rapidly he would lose his physical strength, he would have fought harder to stay mobile. He would have pushed himself to remain active, to keep moving, even when the internal desire was absent. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, will you have enough motivation to stay physically fit when the entire environment encourages maximum ease? Because once you slow down, regaining your former activity is much harder than it seems. Regret 5. Loss of privacy and dignity. One aspect he didn't fully grasp before moving into the nursing home was the colossal loss of personal space and privacy. At home, he had his own sanctuary. He could lock his bedroom door, enjoy quiet whenever he wished, and operate on his own terms. In a nursing home, however, privacy becomes a luxury not always maintained. From the moment he arrived, he felt constantly observed. Staff were always coming and going, routine room checks were conducted, and common areas rarely offered solitude. Even simple acts like dressing or using the bathroom often required someone's assistance. He understands staff were just doing their jobs, but accepting help with things one has done independently for a lifetime isn't easy. He recalls his first week, struggling with the idea of needing permission for what he once did without a second thought. Want a shower? You might have to wait for someone to assist. Need the restroom? Sometimes pressing the call button means waiting longer than desired. Even food choices were limited. If what was on the menu that day wasn't to your taste, well, you had to accept it. Then there was the issue of roommates. Not everyone get a private room, and sharing space with someone you didn't choose can be deeply unpleasant. He was fortunate with a kind roommate, but he heard stories from others who were far less lucky. Some had noisy, unclean roommates, or even individuals with cognitive impairments that made sleep nearly impossible. No matter how hard one tries to make their room feel like home, it never truly becomes their own. Dignity is something hard to lose, and he didn't realize how much of his he'd have to surrender until he was already there. When people knock, but don't always wait for an answer before entering. When you're spoken to as a patient, not a person. When your routine is dictated by a schedule you didn't create. All of this changes you. You start to feel less like yourself and more like just another name on a list. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready to give up the privacy and control you've had your entire life? Because once it's gone, it's incredibly hard to get back. Regret 6. Realizing it's harder to leave than it seems. When he first moved into the nursing home, he convinced himself it was a temporary solution. He believed he'd try it, assess the situation, and if he didn't like it, he could always leave. However, he didn't realize how difficult it would be to get out once he was inside. At first, it seemed simple. If he didn't like it, he'd just go home. But home wasn't the same anymore. His dwelling was empty, and maintaining it from a distance became difficult. His children had already started making changes, selling things they thought he wouldn't need, and even considering renting out the property. When he spoke of returning, they expressed doubts. Are you sure you can manage on your own? Isn't it safer to stay? We just want what's best for you. Then there was the problem of physical decline. After months of living in a place where he didn't have to cook, clean, or even walk far, he wasn't as strong as he used to be. The independence he once had began to slip away, making the idea of returning home more difficult than he ever imagined. He wasn't as confident in his ability to live alone, and that fear held him back. He met others who had similar experiences. They thought they'd try the nursing home for a while, only to find that leaving wasn't as simple as they assumed. The longer one stays, the harder it becomes to readjust to life outside. Some people even lost that option entirely when their home was sold or their savings were depleted by the cost of care. There was no going back. This is the part no one talks about. Moving in seems like a reversible decision, but for most people, it's not. The nursing home slowly becomes one's entire world, and before they realize it, the outside life they once knew begins to feel like a distant memory. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you prepared for the possibility that once you enter, leaving may not be as easy as you think? Because once you settle in, the barriers to leaving, whether financial, physical, or emotional, can be harder to overcome than you expect. Final thoughts. In retrospect, he doesn't regret the aging process, but he deeply regrets his conviction that a nursing home was the only possible solution. He arrived anticipating a higher level of comfort, security, and an improved quality of life. Instead, he encountered a reality that gradually stripped him of his autonomy, personal space, life's purpose, and even his own sense of self. Does this mean all nursing homes are unfavorable institutions? Not at all. For certain individuals, the level of specialized care provided by such facilities is indeed vital. However, before making such a significant decision, it's crucial to deeply consider which aspects of your life you are willingly giving up. Because once you make that move, your life will never return to its former state. If he had the chance to start over, he would fight much more resolutely to keep his home, actively seek alternative ways to get the necessary support without sacrificing his freedom, and ensure the absolute necessity of such an irreversible step before taking it. And if anyone faces a similar life-altering choice, he sincerely hopes they take the time to ask themselves a key question. Is this decision truly the best for them, or does it merely seem the easiest and most convenient at the moment? Because the life you have today, your established routines, your precious independence, your right to your own choices, is undoubtedly worth clinging to and preserving for as long as possible.